All right, we're back, and it's COMP1002, Web and Internet Fundamentals, and it's week 9, lesson 9, part 1. And what we're going to be talking about today, like I said, is kind of a review, a little bit of the box model. We kind of briefly talked about it, scratched the surface last week. I want to get more into that this week. I'm also going to present to you assignment 4 and lab 6. Right, which is kind of for the box model. Assignment 4 due in a couple weeks on week 11. That's when I have. So I think it's the 27th of November. So you got a couple weeks to do that one. Again, we're 10%, and then the lab is due, by next week, let's say. Right, so it gives you a chance to kind of puddle around with the box model and everything else. Okay. Also, like I said, I put on your final project up online as well, so you can see that, and it'll be due the last week of class. So this will be week 14 on the Friday by midnight. So that'll be like December 18th, like way out there, right? So you can have this final project that's out there, so you can start planning. The reason why I put it out there so you guys can all plan, so you're not like blindsided in terms of workload, right? I don't want that to happen because everyone's going to be asking you to do assignments and exams and everything else, right? So. And like I was saying earlier in class, in my intro, is this week, just from a planning perspective, we're into week 9. By week 10, my thinking is we'll get into JavaScript. So next week, we'll get into JavaScript. And by in the quiz, we'll have a quick quiz, almost like a little test. In week 11, so not next week, but the week after, we'll have a little quiz. Again, it'll be 5% of your mark. And it'll be based on the box model, some other CSS stuff we've been talking about over the last few weeks. And then by the end, we'll base our final exam mostly on JavaScript, right? So it'll be more on interactivity and stuff we can get from JavaScript, okay? There might be some more things on, if I can fit it in, depending on how things fall, it might be more on responsive design techniques as well, right? So responsive design and JavaScript mostly on the final exam. And again, we'll have maybe a lab or two in that space. Okay, let's get moving and grooving on this one. So I'm bringing up VS Code here, and I've got up last week's work. We did COMP1002 lesson 8, right? So where we had kind of a CSS file, and on the right-hand side we have our HTML file. You can certainly find this stuff up online. If I go to GitHub, github.com, and if I look at Georgian, right, then you may have lesson 8 here. Here it is, COMP1002 lesson 8, exactly 7 days ago. So if you don't have this up, or you deleted the file that you were working on or whatever, it's okay. Just go grab it from GitHub, right, because that's where it is right now. So we can follow along together. Okay, cool. So let's see what we've got. One thing to note is, again, in VS Code, if I right-click and I go to Open in Terminal, it'll bring up my terminal window here, and it's inside. As we see, we're kind of running in here inside of the folder for the project. So what I want to do is, like I said to you before, I'm going to run this little server, HTTP server. Right, which is we downloaded through npm, right? Remember, so it's a little mini server that we run on the back end so we can run stuff, right? You guys all remember that? Yay or nay? Yay? Okay, remember that? Okay, yeah. So if I run it, what it does is it serves up this page in my local host on port 8080, right? So if I was to go up, and if I was to go up here and say localhost 8080. Then it'll bring up my page, and it's a big mess, right? This is how we left it last week, right? And I was using this as an example. One thing I mentioned last week, which I recommend to you guys, is use borders, right, to do your troubleshooting, right? So it's a bit of a mess, as you can see, and the big box that's in here, actually, it's the H1 tag, right? The H1 tag is massive right now that I made, right? So let's see how I've done that, just as a review. If we go back, so. What I've said is, if I target that one H1 tag, the H1 tag that's in my my page is got a couple things. I got an amalgam of classes here, a bunch of classes that I've used kind of to compose the style for this particular element, right? So I have text center, red border, width 300, height 300. Those are my classes that I've created, uppercase and underline, right? So if you look down here, what these all are, I've just made classes that do one thing. So width 300 has 300 pixels. Height 300 is 300 pixels. Text right, as an example, text center and so on. These are just classes. And what you can do, just as a reminder, is you can compose a series of classes on one element. That's what I've done here. So text center, red border, width 300, height 300. All that stuff is on all on one element. It's silly, all right? Like we made this as an example. So let's take away a couple of them to show you what those. That's not what I wanted, but let's suppose that it saves, right? And if I go back to here and refresh, you can see that the height of this element, this H1 tag, is reduced now back to normal. Notice also how that the H1 tag is trying to, or the whole element itself is trying to house the welcome text, but it's peeking out, right? It's peeking out. It's got like a little bit above and a little bit below. All right. Okay, we're going to fix that. And let's talk about this a little bit. So we've got our external style sheet. There's some different approaches that we've been taking, and one of them is this idea of, again, a fixed width layout. So I have, imagine if I was going to only produce websites for desktop applications. Nowadays, that's really not the way we do it anymore, right? I mean, quite honestly, if all we do is produce websites for desktop apps, we've just cut out 40% of our potential users, right? Because 40% of us or more now, surf the web with our cell phones or some kind of mobile device, on a regular basis. And most times, depending on the website, we're over 55% in terms of consumption, right? So if I use my smartphone, I mean, a lot of times I'll do surfing here first, and then I'll do it again sometimes if I want more detail on my desktop. So I do kind of both, right? But in terms of total consumption worldwide, cell phone use, smartphones, and tablets, those kind of things, mobile devices in general, have kind of gone beyond the use that we get from desktop now, right? So we're almost like more mobile, slightly, in terms of percentage use than desktop. And the reason for that is because it's easier for us to look it up here than to pull up my laptop, open it up, and all that kind of stuff. So if we were only going to do a fixed width design, which doesn't make any sense, right, anymore, that means we'd chop off half of our audience, at least in that range, 40 to 50%, depending on where you are and what you're doing, right? That's huge because remember, when we do websites and we develop on the web, the majority of the reason why we're doing it is because we want to share information, right, for people most of the time, and it provides almost like a part of our website is part of the whole marketing strategy. As an example of a company, could be that. Could also be communicating products and services, or selling stuff online is becoming way more prevalent now than, let's say, 5 years ago even, right? Almost everybody has some kind of cart, right? If you actually make a website, they want to consume something, want to show products or whatever. So, again, you're kind of chopping your audience in half. So that's why fixed width layout is, it's important to understand how to do it. It's a little easier, but responsive design, this whole responsive web design with a fluid or liquid layout is the one we want to kind of focus on, right? So we'll talk about that a lot more today and how to accomplish that with CSS. Again, it talks about page structure on this one. Like, for example, we talked about articles and asides and how to separate things out in a semantic manner, right? Because, and Scott will tell you this too if you talk to him. His big thing is, if you ever have a conversation with him, because he's the web guru, right? And he's also a design guy. And he says it a lot. He says, if your page is structured ugly, right? Doesn't matter what your CSS looks like. Your CSS will be even uglier, right? Because you have to make sure that you're structured, right? This is almost like a process. When you start building your page out, think about the building blocks of your page. You have your content, your text. Someone writes an essay, right? And they want to put it up online as some kind of blog post or whatever, right? You got to structure that out so that it's legible to everybody. It's now that it has to flow to different viewports. Viewport being the size of your screen that's consuming the data, right? It's got to be flexible, and it's got to be laid out in a manner that it flows from or works on that device. There's also one other thing to think about when we structure web pages these days, apart from the stuff that's listed up here, which is just because you can put it on the website doesn't mean you should put it on the website, right? And the reason for that is maybe on your desktop version, and there should be really, if you think about it in a larger situation, your desktop version and then some kind of version or pages layout, if you will, for mobile. I'm just going to blanket that and say mobile in general, tablet, and kind of grouping tablet and smartphone together. But realistically, even 3 different layouts would be something that's not unheard of these days. It's happening more and more often. We have 3 different layouts. We do some design work for the layouts, like wireframes, if you will, just to kind of map out what they look like, each of the pages. And each page, I'm talking about, here's my landing page template, right? Okay, what is my landing page going to look like on mobile or desktop or tablet? It's going to look a little different, right? And here's the other thing. Am I going to have all the same links on my mobile phone, my smartphone layout, as I would on a desktop? And the answer should be no, right? Because I don't need all the links here. What am I really doing with my smartphone? What's the usage scenario? Why do if I was I got to think about this. If I was a user using my smartphone, accessing whatever X website, what are the primary reasons why I'm accessing it? What's the usage scenario? So if let's say, for example, I have a restaurant website, then I got to make sure that I have access to the menu and location of the restaurant, maybe some call-in number to make an order, right? That's really what they're there for. Some ideas. If I don't have access to that on my smartphone, something's wrong, right? If all I have is like, a nice picture of what the restaurant looks like, meh, that's important, but it's not as important as menu and how to call into the restaurant and maybe make a reservation online, those kind of things, or order online. Those are the things. But if I'm going to a place, like let's say, for example, I'm going to Canada's Wonderland, right? Again, this can be a different usage scenario on my cell phone, right? Maybe I can buy tickets. I should be able to do that. Maybe I can get Fast Pass so I go through the rides faster. Maybe I can do a couple things, but maybe I don't need to know all the, about Canada's Wonderland too much in too much detail, like the history of Canada's Wonderland and how it was bought by Paramount and sold back to, whatever. I don't need to know all that. It may not be the first thing I see. So the order, the layout, it could be there, be buried in here on my smartphone scenario, right? But it may not be the first thing. So it's not just about laying out content. It's also about how the content flows on different viewports and the scenario, the story, the user story that I'm going to have. What's the difference between me? Why am I using it here? If I'm consuming the data on my cell phone, what's different from doing it here compared to the desktop, right? And another example of that is if I have a website that does development, code development, right? And it has various videos, tutorials on how to, let's say for developers like you guys, right? Am I going to share GitHub on my phone, right? A link to GitHub? You could, but it's useless. I can't look at code very nicely on my phone. It's very hard, right? I can watch a video, right? That might be a good scenario. I might be able to read some stuff, but GitHub, that's a useless thing to put on my cell phone as a link, right? Linking to GitHub, right? So again, you got to think about, it's not because you can do it, it's that you should do it, right? I have a gun at home, let's say. I'm making this a really extreme example, right? I have a gun at home, right? And if a neighbor pisses me off, I really could shoot him in the head, right? But should I, right? The answer is probably not, right? Probably not. And the same thing goes with, and just to give you, wake you guys up this morning, and same thing goes with websites. Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. And the same thing goes with applications, right? If I build an application, yeah, I can make fancy noises, and whatever. Imagine if you go to these websites these days, how many websites do you go to that make noise when you get there? Ding, 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 and some kind of music. Not very many, right? Because it's considered not cool, right, anymore. But I'll tell you, 10 years ago, right, there was websites like that. You'd go on the website, and there's like noise, and every time you click a link or hover over it, it would go beep, 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 beep. Like it's annoying, right? You don't want that. It's nice to have blink. Now, it's different if it's some kind of theme website. Like you're looking at a movie website. Maybe then you'd want some interactivity, some animation, those kind of things. But for a business website, that's not the right scenario, right? So again, take this away. When you structure your websites, you got to think about what belongs there and what doesn't. Good HTML structure are the bones of your website, right? And then just your CSS, if you will, is the skin and the hair and everything else that goes in your website to make it look nice, right? Otherwise, you're just going to see bones, right? And bones is pretty ugly, right? If all you see is bones. So you got to kind of do those things together, right? The meat is the content, right? Meat and bones, and that's all it is, and there's no skin. It's pretty ugly, right? Skin is what's going to make it look nice, and we're going to do that with CSS. And of course, the interactivity, the smarts behind the websites nowadays, primarily are moving towards a whole JavaScript front end and back end. And that's why we're going to focus on JavaScript starting next week and moving forward. Okay, here's one thing that people ask me. So, you know, I have my website, and should I make it structured for IE8, right? And really, it really depends on your audience. If you're making a website for a government agency, yeah, you probably should, right? Because there's going to be, you know, governments for whatever reason, whether it's a local, you know, municipal government agency like a city or something like that, or you know, federal. Then what they do is they don't upgrade their machines internally or externally, as an example, for a while. Like they're kind of behind. Like right now, I'll tell you right now, most government agencies are just now getting into Windows 7, right? That would be, you know, that's pretty. They just moved away from, let's say, recently. We're talking about within a year, Windows XP, right? Which is insane. It's like crazy. But that's how it is, the flow of people using and consuming products. And for the reason why is we want to go to end of life. If I buy a product in the government, I want to take it right to the end, right? To really get the most use out of it, the return on our investment kind of thing, right? And that kind of goes back to, okay, if that's true, and if most browsers were using this old version of IE7, IE8, right, as an example, the capabilities of those older browsers, especially the Windows browser, really reduced the, you know, what we could do with it. Now, if you were going to make it for the modern web, for programming for the modern web, if you have a customer who's making a brand new website, I wouldn't target IE8 at all. I would say, well, most people nowadays, even their smartphone is better than IE8, right? So, and again, 50% of those people, 45 to 50% in that range, let's say 40 to 50, have a smartphone, something that they're going to potentially consume the website, and the rest are going to use their desktop. And chances are most modern desktops, you're going to buy one within the last 5 years, doesn't just have IE8. It has some other web, web browser, like, you know, Chrome being the most popular one. So again, you target what we want to use when we target our websites. We use tools to determine what it is, what that our audience is. Again, and I kind of brought this up before, but I want to see if I can remind you guys again. And I think it's under frameworks. Yeah, I got a bunch of notes. I think it's gsstatcounter.com. Let's just go there. So I'll say gsstatcounter.com. And when this thing actually works and it doesn't break like this, which is interesting that it did this. Normally, by the way, this wouldn't do this, right? But yeah, let's just turn that on. There we go. It's probably because of my little ghost tree, right? But what it does is, if you go there, if I double click, it actually gives you, let me see if you go there. Do you see this as well? Anybody? It's gsstatcounter.com. Or do you actually get a graph? Maybe the site's down. That's funny. I'll see if I can hit it on another link. I'll do it with Firefox for a second. And sometimes it happens with Chrome that it blocks. Good. Here's Firefox. This is what it really should look like. And I want to show you this. So if you've seen it before, what it does, it kind of gives you global stats for a region. This is going back from, it says June 2013. Let me just update this. And I'll say the last 12 months, and I kind of did that before. I may have shown you this before, I think. Maybe not. But what this site does is it takes global stats, global statistics for browser usage, and it kind of puts it into a bar graph or line graph. I'll let that update. Again, so going with this model, all versions of Chrome worldwide, almost 50% usage of Chrome, right? And then IE, the second highest, is 18%. And if you wanted to understand which version of IE, you can actually break this down as well by the type of browser. So for example, if I click on down here, let's do some more detailed views, right? For example, I can say browser version. That's important to do. That's one thing I want to check out, right? So not just the browser itself, but the browser version. You're going to see all Chrome is going to be big. And the next piece is not just worldwide, but we want to target our market, which is Canada, right? So we want to kind of go into Canada at least, and that piece. So it's not just North America or whatever, it's Canada specific, right? Because most of our customers, if you build a website nowadays, Canadian, right? So we're in Canada. Unless, again, you sell stuff online and you sell things to North America and you ship things out to the States as well as Canada, I mean, you know, you want to kind of target your browser a little bit, of where you're getting kind of the inflow. And it's important to know that. So when you build your website, you go, well, does it really make sense to support, you know, things like, for example, IE11, right? IE11 is 14.75%. But look at this. Look at this other. It's a big pot of stuff. Like 37% of web users, it's kind of rolling the dice, eh? Like you don't know what you're going to get. That's a mix of Chrome and whatever. But look at all the versions of Chrome here. Chrome, 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 Chrome. And that's the majority. If you add all these up, you can see that you know, takes a big chunk of it. Safari iPad, that's interesting. 10% of users in Canada use Safari on an iPad. That's pretty big, right? Huge. You know, and if I was to look at these stats over the last, you know, before 12 months ago, this data would be totally different, right? So, I mean, things are changing. Here's Safari 8, you know, as an example. And then down here, IE8 is 3%. So am I really going to target IE8 anymore in Canada? 3% of my market. You know what? Bye-bye, guys. 3%. See you later. If 3% of my users can't do it, you know what much work is involved in trying to make IE8 compatible websites now? It's tough. It's not easy because the IE8 does not support all the features we want to add in, right? So I'm not sure if I would target IE8 anymore. And in here, when it says 37 other, you know, that's a pretty big amount. You can also keep going further to see not just browser version, and let's say I combine Chrome all versions and Firefox 5+. That's kind of a good click to put on too, because it'll give you a different picture. It'll give us more data, and the reason why it just does this is because it kind of collates or combines these things, and it'll say partially combined. So I like to do that because Chrome, there's lots of versions, and Chrome gets updated fairly regularly. So that's why we saw Chrome, 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 Chrome all the way down. But again, IE8 to me doesn't make any sense. So there's a better picture for you. So Chrome all 38%, IE11, that's really what we should target for Internet Explorer, right? Notice that the Edge isn't even on the list right now because it's just so new, right? Firefox 5. Right, so that's 15%. Here's Safari iPad at 10, and there's another Safari, and an IE8 is 3, and then there's lower, right? So Safari 7.1, IE9. That's interesting. IE9 has less market share than IE8, right? And here's IE10, right, which is even more bizarre. But this is like how we're browsing. So you can see the shift that everyone's shifted to the latest, at least Windows 7, because I think IE11 is Windows 7, yeah, Windows 8. So that's where we're sitting at for a lot of the people that use Microsoft products in Canada, right, over the last 12 months. Okay, so again, when we start structuring our pages, as an example, does it make any sense for me to target anything in this range? Well, if I combine all this, it becomes like 10%, or whatever, at least 10% or more, right? So, I mean, all these little things, I mean, I would lose 10% of my users at least, and maybe with this combined 5% other, don't know if I mean, potentially I could lose 15% of my market share, right? So you really got to look and see what I would target and what I won't. I'll tell you right now that Safari, these two Safaris, these three Safaris, these four right here, Safari, 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 is probably going to support more than IE8, right? So I don't have to worry about these. They almost use the same engine. But, even IE10. IE10's okay, and IE9, it's not so bad. But once we get back to the beyond IE8 and older, it doesn't make any sense for us to plan that anymore. So here in this usage here, I'm just so surprised that this does this. I guess I'm just blocking it, which is, you know, maybe it's okay. But if I go back to what I'm talking about here with you know, a PowerPoint presentation, right? I'm not gonna target it, and I don't expect you to target IE8 or older when you do your styling. And in most modern web applications, we don't, right? We can't. It's too much work, unless specifically asked to. We're getting paid to do it, right? Like the government's asking us to do it. But if the customer asks me, should we support older browsers beyond IE8, I'd say no. Chances are no. 3% market share. That's very small, right? We talked about normalize before, or some kind of reset. Now you can find normalize by itself. Normalize is the other way to do it. You know, there's reset CSS, and if I was to look up reset CSS like last time, you can see that there's one place we got that from, reset CSS, and which is meyerweb.com Eric tools CSS reset, right? This is the place with the original guy that kind of came up with this reset, and what it does, it kind of zeroes out all browser styles, which is kind of a good thing to do, right? Because it takes away any kind of influence from the browser. However, all things being equal, once we do this, you know, your website looks pretty bland, and then you're forced to code every piece of it. Like, for example, strong and emphasis tags and all those kind of things. Bold, that doesn't mean anything. You know, anything that you normally would think of as bolded, like H1 tags, all being bolded. This reset kills that. It'll kill all that stuff, all the basic styling. And if you look through this, what it does is, again, it kind of zeroes out for a lot of tags, margin 0, padding 0, border 0, font size 100%, and all this kind of stuff. Now, we should be doing something like this in our websites when we start programming out. So let's, for now, as we start off, let's download again this little file. And again, the place to get this is meyerweb.com, Eric, tools, reset. And you can get the copy of the file by right-clicking here and save, or you can just copy it from right here. So let's say if I was going to create a new file in Visual Studio Code, I'm going to go into Content, right-click on Content, create a new file that we're going to call, oh, actually we have it already, main CSS, but I want to call make one called Reset CSS. And if I double-click on Reset CSS, you can see on the right-hand side here, there's two. There's main and reset. My reset should be the one that I'm getting from MeyerWeb. So if I just kind of grab all this stuff at the very minimum. By the way, normalize is there's other more modern versions of this, but this will do. And I'm just going to paste. So that's my reset. And just because I made it as an example doesn't mean that it makes any sense. Let me just fix I've been working on some other projects lately with code. I'm just going to take away some of my keyboard shortcuts here because that's really annoying. So let's get rid of this. It tries to compile, and I'm not compiling anything here. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, let's go back to that. So this reset CSS, if you notice, it zeroes out everything, but it's not really on. It's not really added to my website. And the way to do that, of course, is in my index.html in the head of my document. I really got to put my reset styles before my regular style sheet, because otherwise, like we mentioned before, if I put it after, it'll reset everything I've done. It'll just zero everything back out, which doesn't make any sense, right? So let's put this before. So I'm just going to copy this line to save myself some time, copy, and go underneath the CSS section and paste. And we're going to put in this reset.css, right? There we go. So now when I go back to the website, right, if I go back to COMP1002, it'll be even different than this. If I refresh, you can see that everything gets reset like right back to normal. So this is your reset. These are only my styles that I've put in here. Everything else that I haven't styled is back to its, you know, kind of base styles, if you will, right? And that's a good thing. That means everything that you're seeing here is me. I'm the one that's controlling it, even though however ugly it is right now. It's my ugliness, right? I was the one that made it, right? I don't have an influence over the website from built-in browser styles, and that's a good thing. Okay, so we talked about reset. There's also something it says that an HTML5 shiv, right? That that is, it kind of makes it so that sometimes, and especially with older versions of IE, you can support your, different JavaScript and so on your website. I'm not going to put that into play because I'll tell you right now, I'm not going to support older browsers beyond, let's say IE8 anymore. It doesn't make sense for 3% of market share to spend time on this. Okay, so we zeroed out our styles with reset, and let's talk about the box model in a little bit more detail. So we talked about it last week, but I want you to think about it like this. When you look at the box model, imagine that every element that you have on the page is a container, every single element. And think about each of the containers, them being inside, almost like a hierarchy, right? So we talked about this whole parent-child relationship thing, right? And there's also siblings, right? Siblings, which mean that there's also, let's say, brother and sister elements that are sitting inside of the same box. So I have this big box. Let's say the main higher element for our cells. If I go back to our Visual Studio Code and I look at this, the body tag here would be the root element, if you will, for everything else. My header tag, which right now sits empty, but we're going to fill that up today, right, is a child of the body tag, right? And just as a review, my main element is a sibling on the same level, let's say, in terms of hierarchy, as our header. So we're looking at almost like a tree-based hierarchy, a tree where there's the root and there's different branches, right? The root of the tree, the trunk of the tree, if you will, is this, the body tag, right? And then each of these branches, the header branch, the main branch, and so on, and the footer branch right now are the three branches that come off the root of the tree, or the trunk of the tree, if you will, right? And then underneath that, in the hierarchy, the main branch also has little branches, if you will, right? I have an H1 tag, a paragraph tag, and then there's another H2 tag and a paragraph tag. These are all siblings, right? So the paragraph tag has an H2 tag, another paragraph tag, another paragraph tag, and an H1 tag as a sibling. They're all on the same level in terms of our tree. There's smaller branches, but on the same level, right? Another way to think about this is that, think about this as a node, right? So the root node would be the body, and then underneath that, from a hierarchy perspective, would be your header, your main, as an example, and your footer. Those are the three subnodes, if you will. These subnodes that I mentioned are the children of the root node, right? Body tag, the body element. Okay. I'm telling you this this is what I'm describing to you actually in a very high level is the DOM, the document object model, right? At a very high level. And the reason why we need to know this is when we do JavaScript, we're going to target some of these elements, right? I'm going to say the next child, or I'm going to talk about the parent to the child, or I'm going to kind of point to where in the document object model that we're targeting for us to impose any kind of interactivity. But going back, so this is what our model looks like. When we look at the box model, this box model has been around for several years now, right? And every element, just to review, like we said last time, has these properties: a margin top, a border top, a padding top, all these things. And it comes from the beginning. So if you look at content, right? From content, you have the border, right? And before the border, you have this padding that's inside. Between the content and the border, there's some padding. That's what it's called. It's a space, a white space, if you will, between the content and the border, right? And then there's a white space in the border itself, and you can make that color. The border can have a width, right? Some kind of weight to it, if you will, right? And then beyond the border, there's a padding, or which we call margin now. Again, this white space between elements. So I have two brother-sister elements, two siblings, right? And they're inside the same root element. An example of this would be, going back to our code here, would be inside the main element, we have two. We have, or a bunch of them. We have this H1 tag, let's say, and this P tag. These are both on the same level. These two have, they're presented in the same level, and they can have a margin between them. So for example, if I target my H1 tag and I say that all H1 tags, all H tags, period, have margin of 5 pixels, what it's going to do is going to produce white space separation between my H1 tag and immediately my paragraph tag, just that alone. And if I add another 5 pixel margin to my paragraph tag, now the space between them is 10 pixels because it's additive, right? It's incremental. It doesn't say, well, they kind of overlap. No, 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 no. If I say, think about the box expanding, right? And if I specify a width or a height to my objects, an example of this, if I said all H tags have a height of 30 pixels plus a margin of 5 pixels all the way around, right? What's the true height of that object? Let's think about this, right? So going back to the box model here, right? So if I say the actual object itself, the element, right, that I'm looking at, that's just the content, the element that just, if you look at the content itself, I say my width, and if you notice, it's inside the padding, right, not outside, because it's additive, right? So the width goes from content to content, right? It's like from padding left to padding right. Padding left, padding right, border, and margin is not included in the width calculation. It's outside. It's pixels plus it has a margin of 5 pixels all the way around. What's the true height of that object? No, 35 if you just count one side, counting all sides. So the top and the bottom is 5 and 5, right? Now you're looking at, this is where people get into trouble. They don't calculate the top and the bottom. On different sides. And when we start looking at the box model, we should always think about the box model in a clockwise format. So if I was to, even inside our code, we're going to do this. We're going to say, I want you to think about this: top, right, bottom, left, again, a clock, right? That's how we look at the box model. So when we start talking about properties of each of our elements, we're going to say top margin, margin right, margin bottom, margin left. And if you want to do shortcuts, when the first number always refers to the top, the second one is to the right, the third number is to the bottom, and the fourth one is to the left, right? There's some shortcuts we can use in our box model like that. But remember, always top, right, bottom, left, and that every element has, outside of the width and height, add on padding, add on border, add on margin for each side. So if I have, and this is more complicated, I have an object, here we go, I'm just putting it out there. The object has 30 pixels. This could be an exam or test question. So the width or the height is 30 pixels. I have a padding of 5 pixels. I have a border of 2 pixels. This is where it gets crazy, right? And try and figure this on your head, right? And then I have a margin of 10 pixels. What's the true height of the object, right? 64. See what I'm saying? It's like you have to double it because you add, so you take your base 30, add your, let's say 5 for your padding, right? On one side. So now 5 becomes 10 if it's all the same, right? So that's 40, right? If I said 2 for your border, that's 4, right? So that's 44 plus 10 on both sides, right? Is 20, so it's 64, like you said, of a true height, right? So don't think because the width says 30 that it's 30. I just made it 64 by adding a little bit of border, a little bit of margin and padding, right? So that's how we think about it. And when we calculate stuff, sometimes what we want to do, especially because we want to make a fluid layout, we talked about different layouts. What I'm talking about with pixels is a fixed layout. Can we use a fixed layout, really? And the answer is no, we can't. We have to make it so that it's a percentage. That's what makes it more fluid, right? Or we use M's, right? Because M's change depending on what we're looking at sometimes. It's the size of our pixels, but mostly percentages is what we want to go to. Now this is challenging because when I say a percentage, what do I really mean? It's the width. If it's my percentage in width, can I specify a percentage in height and in padding? I can, but what does that percentage mean? Is it the percentage of my, of the screen? Is it the percentage of my parent container? What does that mean? Because you got to specify a percentage of something. So let's try this out. So see what I'm talking about here, because I think you won't know until you actually do it. Okay, so I've got I'm just going to kind of link this through, and so we'll have my page on the right side, and on the left side we'll have our main CSS. Okay, And what I want to specify now is we have a width 30 and a height of 30, but we want to make percent 25, right, as an example. Let's try percent 25 and percent 50. All right, so we're going to make these two new classes on the bottom here. Again, we're going to combine classes, compose the total, we're going to compose this one big class for a specific object, right? So let's try this out. So we're going to say this new class, we're going to call it percent 25, right? Percent 25 is going to be a width, right? So we're going to say the width of an object is 25%. Okay, there we go. And we're going to go also, we're also going to say percent 50, right? And where the width of an object, right, is equal to 50%. Now, what does that mean, right? Percent. So let's try this out. I want to put this, instead of width 300 here on my H1 tag, and again, if you're using the same one that I am, I'm going to make my width, as an example, it's going to say percent. I'm going to change this to percent dash 50. Percent dash 50. And let's see what that does. Right, so I've added percent dash 50 along with this H1 tag, because it's a small tag. And let's go back to our page to see what the effect is. So if notice how right now this was originally 300 pixels, right? It's very specific. But let's see if I go percent 50, refresh. What 50% is that? What does it look like to you by eye? So there's percent. I just put percent 50 in as a class around this object. How about the guys in the back, right? So I say percent 50, right? What 50% does that look like? If you're going to eyeball it now, is that 50% of the screen? The whole screen size? What would you say that is? Tell me. Put up a number for me. Of the which one?
Of the original size.
Well, what's the original size? Remember, the original size is based on the containing container, right? The parent container. So this 50%, if you look at it, if you eyeball it, look at over here. There's a 50% gap on this side, 50%. Not including, take a look. I got this because my main, this object here, which is the main, this is the main component. The main component has some kind of margin that's embedded inside of it, right? Or padding inside, right? So here's the padding that's inside of here. It looks to me like 10 or 20, right? And we can check that if I go back to my CSS, and if I look at the main, my main has, I don't have anything specifically on the main, but I bet you any money if I go to look at all main elements, yeah, look, it has a margin all the way around of 20 and a padding all the way around of 20, right? So that means when I go back to my website, this here, from here, where I'm pointing to the left, where the border should be, which is invisible right now, there's no border, that's 20 pixels, right? Notice how this, the H1 element that's inside of the main, doesn't span over all the way to here because it's contained inside of that 20 pixels, right? So anything that's in here, that's in the 20 pixel area right here from the top all the way to the bottom down to the bottom here, that is considered the content, all right, the child node, the content of the main container, which is up here. Okay, that's what it is. And if I was to look at, take a look here, see how it says this little hamburger over here, right? I'm not going to update Chrome right now, but see that the hamburger is here. If I want to go into, look at more tools, and if I look at my developer tools here, which is in Chrome, I'm just looking at Chrome developer tools here, and if I pull this down for a second, right? If I look at, as I pull it down, notice how it tells me my screen size, right? 1280 by 378 pixels. That's what it is, or 380 right now. This is what my screen size is showing, right? If I start looking at elements, and if I start, kind of running along here, it tells me the size of my elements. So if I actually go through to the actual my document, which is main, if I look at the main, take a look at the colors that I get. The colors, the orange color, right, is the margin. The green color is the padding, right, and the blue color is the content of the main element. And if you notice in the top left corner, it says our main element is 1225 pixels by 332 pixels in this particular way of looking at it, right? Okay, that's cool. And if I was to target something, if I was to actually target my H1 element, it tells me what it is too. My H1, right, has all these classes on it, right? Text center, red border, %50, uppercase, blah, 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 blah. And right now it's 596.5 pixels and 25 pixels in height. See how it's 596.5? Because it's calculating, right, how big it is. So if I was to look at my paragraph tag now, this first paragraph tag, this one, which is the whole height, the whole width of the content of my main. I haven't changed the size of this one, right? It's 1185 pixels. So that is the 100% that I'm looking at. So from that 100%, I took 50% of that 100%, and if I was to do a quick calculation of 50% of 1185, I'm sure that would come out to that. Let's just do that because we're lazy. So I'll just bring up a little calculator here so we can use that. And by the way, it's recorded too. So if I take 1185, right, and if I divide it by 2, right, then I'm going to get 592.5, right? That is half of the width of the content that's inside that's contained from here, from this corner here, to this kind of piece right here of the content of my main, right? So it says 592.5, and if I concentrate on my H1 tag, notice how it's 596.5. So slightly bigger in terms of width percentage than the contents of my container, right? So does that mean, and I'm just asking this question, right? Why is that? Because I have a border. That's why. I have a border, and the border has added on to that 50%. This is the thing that people go crazy about, right? It's not contained in, right? So my H1 tag, yes, it should be 592.5, but I have to add a border of, and if you notice I said this is a red border, let's go back to our style for what red border means. And I probably put it up here as red border here. 2 pixels all the way around, which means on the left and on the right is 2 pixels. So it's 2 pixels plus 2 pixels, which is 4 pixels, plus 592.5, which gives us 596.5, which is exactly what we're getting if you look at the total size. So if I go back to Chrome, and if I was to hover over our H1 tag here, it says 596.5, which is the 4 pixels that we're going to get for border, plus half of the total content size of our containing element. Right? That's why people misunderstand the box model. When they try and put stuff together, you think that if I say 50%, it's 50%. It's not. It's incremental. You add on. You don't put within. You don't contain everything, your border, your margins, and everything within 50%. That would be easier to do. And by the way, there are ways of doing that, right? Here's a challenge for you guys. Can anyone find that? How do I contain, and look online, do a Google search. I challenge you right now, right? Is there a way, is there some kind of element, some kind of declaration that I got to make in my CSS to make it so that everything is contained, my border, my margin, my padding is contained within the width, as opposed to added on to the width. There is an element, there's a way of doing it. So look it up on Google. Yeah.
No, this is a visual one.
You guys see if you can find it. Well, it should, right? Because since you wipe it off, then you should be applied. All you need one to be applied on the main. Make sure that main that's still there. Right? Did you save it? Not save it. Save it. Not save it. I'm not sure why it's not showing you the styles. It should be showing you the styles. Unless the path is wrong somehow. Well, that's what reset does is it wipes stuff out and then main layers on top of it, right? All right, so notice how that does that. So if you notice here, I have this orange piece that I'm highlighting, and you notice how my H1 tag doesn't have any margins or anything like that. Anyone find it yet? How do I contain everything within? If I go the box model, I want to contain everything within the box model. Yeah, you found it? Let's try it. I want to try this out for you. So I'm going to say this. I'm going to put it as part of the main. right? So box sizing, border box, what you said, right? Let's try this out. So let's say box sizing, or not box shadow, box sizing, and then you know, border box. Here it is. And it says the specified width and height and respective min max properties on this element are the ones that are being affected. Let's see if that works. Okay, so I'm updating this box sizing border box, right? And I'm going back here and refreshing. And now, if we've done everything correctly, we should see it. We should have seen a different image happen, right? Let me take a look. Make sure that I've saved everything first. Yes. So going back here, and if I inspect the element again, if I go back to my main, right? Notice how my main is 1225 again, right? And if I look at my my paragraph tag within my main, I did refresh, right? My paragraph tag within my main is again 1185, so no difference here. But let's take a look at my my welcome, which is what I really want to look at, right? So now it's 596.5, so no difference. Keep going. I like your thinking though, right? Okay, so again, this is the way the box model works, and again, we can use Chrome and other tool sets to take a look at what a box model looks like. And if you notice here, it actually shows us a little picture. If you scroll down, here's the box model itself, and you can actually look at the box model. It tells you that for the element that I selected, the body element, right? There's no margin, there's no border, there's no padding that I've added in here. Again, I'm looking at just the body element, right? The body element itself, right? Margin is 0, border is 0, padding is 0, and I've got 1265 by 377. If I go into the main element, if I click that, that's a different picture. It shows me my 20 pixels of margin, right? I've got a border of nothing, right? And I've got 20 pixels of padding, right? So it actually shows you right here. So if you were ever to think of what it is, you can't figure it out, you can do that. And this is right here, 1185 by 292 for the content. So again, this is content, padding, border, as an example, border size, and then margin, right? And it tells you, if you actually look through this, Chrome allows us, these tools in Chrome allow us to do that. Another thing to always look at is something called computed. So one is this one tab is styles, and the other tab that I have here is computed. Computed actually shows us the total computed size, right, for all styles that are being affected. For example, here's this box sizing border box that we try to put on, right, to see what it does. Ah, tell me what it is. Oh no, you got to tell me the exact thing. So they got the exact code here to put on. So you're saying
Just in front.
so just in front, say what? Yeah, the WebKit. WebKit, and then dash box, right? Box sizing, and then border box. How come I have to do that? How come I have to do box sizing, WebKit box sizing, border box? And why do I have two of the same elements of the same thing? How come I do that? Anybody know? Because different browsers have different support for different kinds of CSS. Not all CSS browsers are created equal. So we have to use these alternate, kind of declarations for different browsers. Okay, let's see if that works. So let me save that, and let me go back to thing in here, and let's see if I get a different picture. I can tell you that there's no difference. Right, so here's again, if I look at it, it's still 596.5. Right, what we're looking at is for this to be 592.5, where the border is inside the object. Right. How about if we were specific? Right. So if I was actually going to go and look at specific sizes, because we haven't really specified stuff. So let me take that same element. I'm going to go back to our styles here, and this WebKit box size, border box, all this kind of stuff that we had in here. Let's take this and apply it to my specifically to my H1 tag, right here. So I'm going to go back to where all my H1 tags have that. Let's just do that. So put that in that same grouping of commands right here. Let's see what that does for us. So if I was to look at it now and refresh, it did shift slightly. I don't know if you noticed that, but it did shift. Okay, let's take a look at what it looks like now for our H1 tag. Ah, that's what I was looking for, 592.5. So now our borders are inclusive with our style by using box sizing border box. Why? And why is that a good thing to do? I'll tell you right now, this is actually a really nice thing to put on. Once we include this thing, now our calculations become easy, right? Because if I add margin and border, that's going to shrink the content. It's not going to push outside the box that the width that we say, right? It's going to contain everything inside that box, right? Now remember, we're not going to get support for all browsers, just like we saw, right? So what other browsers, what are the other extensions for the browsers that we want to target? It's not just WebKit. What are the other ones? There's a few others. What else can we put in here to target all browsers for that particular style? So if I was to go back, there's WebKit. How about if I start typing dash, and if I go O, is there Opera or some kind of IE? You know, is there something else other than WebKit is what I'm saying when I put the dash in here? And if you scroll down, it does tell you, you know, there's different kinds of things you can put in here. But you need to know that there's browser-specific extensions for different kinds of effects that we want to put in play. Okay? And we're going to talk about some of these special effects today. Let's leave it for now, and we'll get back to it. Okay, so there's WebKit, box sizing border box, and there's box sizing border box. We've only put it on our H1 tags. What if we want, you know, everything to have this quality? Where would we put this by default? Is there something we can put this on so that everything in our code is just, you know, box size border box? I'm just going to put these two things. I'm going to take it out of here, and let's see if this was to work. And what if I put it on my body tag? Does that work? So margin and padding of 0 for now, but for what we're going to do is we're going to do that little thing here. We're going to kind of put it in so that our WebKit and regular box sizing is border box, right? So contain everything within is what we're saying. And then let's remove it from the main because we had it there too. We don't want to put that anymore. And let's see if that does it, right? By the way, there's some tricks that I recommend that we use for some of this stuff because we may not always want to do this. Let's go back. And did I save? I did. Refresh. Okay, now notice how it shifted back. If I go back and I try to apply it to everything, right, as an example, but it doesn't get inherited, right? It's not like everyone inherits this property of box size border box. When I put it on my body tag, yeah, that's cool, but now I'm back with my H1 tag to 506.5 pixels, right? It's exclusive. So the good thing to do is to add this in as a class that we can reapply to different elements. We don't have to apply them to all elements because we may not care. We have to be very careful because once we start using this style of doing stuff, it's like we have to use it everywhere, right? Which makes, to me, it almost makes no sense. Be careful is all I'm saying, because once you do this, some browsers may not support what you're trying to do, okay? For now, let's go with traditional styles and leave that as an option. If we want a very specific area to be a certain width and height, we use it, right? And maybe what we want to put is something like a contained thing, something like a container, and we have a container tag that makes sure that our container tag includes, our container class includes this box size border box. Okay, so we only do for containers, not necessarily for H1 tags, right? So the H1 tag, we don't want to do that much control, but maybe for our main, we say yes, right? So that way we can control this, especially with that main and let's say an aside. We want to be able to control both those things. Okay, so let's go back to our styles. So this didn't work, like I knew it wouldn't. On our body tag, it's not something that's inheritable. This can't be inherited. So we'll take this out. And we'll go back down here to the bottom, and we'll make another crazy class. We'll call container. And our container class is going to have one of these couple of declarations in here. And if I want to, then I can include this class as an example on my HTML as an example of container. And we can do the same thing for our header tag because we want to make that a container. Right? Not all things, but just things that count. So we can, for our basic layout, the big piece of our layout, we want that, right? And maybe for our footer, right? So class red border, but we also want a class of container, right? Okay, cool. Let's see what the effect that has on our website. So here's what it looks like now. And then when I refresh, right, we don't see much of a difference. But now we know that our main tag contains everything, margin, border, the whole thing. It doesn't add on. And that's an important thing to add that in. Okay. And same thing with our copyright tag. See, our copyright tag, it goes way to the edge, but you know, I can splinter that off. Okay, let's take a look. So here's our box model again. So again, content, padding, border, margin. You're going to get this question on a test, eh? Tell me the box model. Explain, label each of the things here. What do they mean, right? And then what do? We use the clock pattern to think about how we configure the box model, right? So top, right, bottom, left, a clock pattern, right? That's in our minds, right? Okay, and here's this idea, what we just got, set box size border box on an element to match display with the element to the value of the width property. This is exactly what we just talked about, right? But we can't put box size border box on every single element. Otherwise, you're going to have to, I mean, you have to include this as one of the same things we're going to include over and over again on all the elements, right? I mean, it's going to be on every single tag we do because it's non-inheritable, right? That's to know. But the default model, what it does is it adds on. It's an additive model, right? It's an incremental model where you add on padding and borders and everything else, right? Okay, so again, there's different display types like it says here. There's block display, which starts a new line, like a new paragraph. So when I say block, display block, that's one of my elements. One of my display is display block, right? It says start a new line with this particular element. That's what it means when I say display block. If I display inline, right? Don't generate a new line when I display my next object, okay? So display block, display inline. This is the display property we're talking about here, right? And if I do inline block, it says it's a hybrid display that allows an element to appear inline with other content while otherwise behaving like a block level element. So it'll try and display everything next to each other, and when it runs out of room, it's going to display block. So go to the next line. Let's look and see a good example of this. This is a really good example of using, if I create some kind of navigation. So let's add a navigation to our page, right? And by the way, we're also covering lists today a little bit, and we've already covered them, but I want to talk about that again. So I'm going to go back into my main.css here, and on the left, I'm going to put in my HTML because I'm going to modify my HTML. So we'll go here, and on the top, right, notice how I have a header that's empty, right? So inside my header element, I want to put a couple things, right? I want to put in a nav element, right? And inside my nav element, I want to have an unordered list, right? What's the difference between an unordered list and an ordered list? Anybody remember? Unordered list, what is it? It's like those dots. When you get like a, kind of a little dots or stars or whatever, that's an unordered list. You can create an icon that kind of separates list items, right? An ordered list starts with some kind of numeral, right? Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or I, IV, and so on. Like different kinds of enumeration. That's what it does, right? But we're using an unordered list, and inside an unordered list, we have several list items, right? Each list item is an item in the list, okay? I just want you just to say it again so in different ways, okay? And I want to have, with my shorthand, 5 of these list items, like we are a 5-page site, right? And each list item then is going to contain an anchor tag. An anchor tag, again, used for navigation, right? That's what an anchor tag is for links, right? And in our anchor tag, we want to specify our href, which is our hyperlink, right, to be equal to, for now, the #, which means don't go anywhere, right? And then when I put the curly braces mean the content of my anchor tag. It refers back to the parent tag, which is the anchor tag. So the content, right, of my anchor tag is going to be link. It's going to say link, then pound, and then if I put a $, it's going to add in a variable that allows me to increment my $, every time I add another list item. So it'll say if I put a $, it means it'll increment from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 all the way. If I put $2, it'll go 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, and so on. Like example like this. If I put $2, it'll say 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3. And if to the end, I have to press tab. When I do that, I get this. right? So one line, and I get like this little unordered list. The unordered list is the container that contains my list, right? This is my list, and inside my list, I have several list items. These are my list items, right? With different link text. Okay, cool. So what I want to do is I want to say this. I want to say, well, each of my list items, I want to display inline. Okay, because right now the default is display block to go from to the next line, the next line, the next line, right? I don't want to display these block. I want to display inline, right? So I want to target these list items. But I don't want to target every single list item because I might have a list that I want to display as normal lists, right? So what do I need to do? I need to create some kind of class that's on my unordered list or in my navigation, whatever I decide to put. I have to put a class somewhere in my container, right? So how do I do that? Well, I'm going to say, I'm going to call it a class right now. This is my navigation. My class is my main nav or something like that. Well, main nav, that sounds like it should be on my nav bar or my navigation element here, okay? So let's try this out. So I'm going to say, I'm going to create a class on the right side. We're going to call it main nav, right? And my main nav on the right side, I'm just going to pull it up so you guys can see it, right? I want it so that every list item, right? All the list items in my main nav. Look how I'm talking. You kind of do from right to left, like we talked about before when we do compound styles, right? So all list items. This is how we read it in my main nav that have a class of main nav, right? That's what I'm targeting. I don't have a list item like that, right? Or in an element that have a class of main nav. I want them to have a display property of inline. Okay, that's what I want them to do. An inline display properly. Okay, so all list items. And of course, I got to put the class in here. So here's my nav. And again, I want all elements to be displayed inline. Let's see what the effect that has on the website now. So refresh, and there we go. We have an inline list. A list link 1, link 2, link 3, link 4, link 5, right? Okay, I want to get rid of the underlines, right? What do you know? Do any of you know the property that I have to put the declaration I do to take away the underline? Anybody? We kind of did it last week where I added an underline in here. Is there a way of taking it away? Who remembers? And it's got to be for each item in the list, right? But what's being underlined? That's the question I have to ask you. Is it the list item that's being underlined, or is it the anchor tag that's being underlined? How do we know that? Well, I can figure that out by again looking at my my browser and taking a look up here, right? So if I kind of go up to the top, I see that here's my header, and I go into my nav, and I go into my UL, which is my unordered list, and inside there I can go into my list item and see that the whole list item is right there, right? Here it is. And inside my list item, I have an anchor tag, right? And then inside there I have the actual link text. So it's either my anchor tag or my list item. Where do you think it is? What am I targeting to get rid of the underline? Anybody? Wow. Yes. Anchor tag. Okay, good. So if I'm targeting the anchor tag, that's what I got to put in there. So let's go back to my styles. That means I can't target it in this declaration because this one only targets my list item. It doesn't talk about my anchor tag at all. So I want to change the text of my anchor tag, which is what I'm doing, right? That's what I got to do. I got to make another declaration like this. So I say main nav, anchor tag, only the anchor tag. So what am I saying here? I'm saying all anchor tags that are contained within an element that has a class of main nav is the one that I'm targeting, all right? I don't have to put LIA, right? I'm saying all anchor tags that were in a class of main nav. I got to be careful here. Sometimes that can affect other elements that are not inside of a UL or a list item, right? Well, for now, it's okay because these are the only anchor tags that are inside this main nav, right? So I can say something like this, text dash decoration, and then I can put in none, right? Text decoration none should remove my underline, right? Let's see if that's true. Let's see if I'm right. So if I go back to this and I refresh, then no more underline. Right, so starting to look more like some kind of nav bar. My nav bar is stinky, eh? It's kind of like way over here, and I can't really see it. So let's add our debugging border on it. There's this red border, which you're going to take away later on. All right. So I'm not going to put that into place. So I'm going to go back to my text, and I want to put a red border around my whole header container. So we'll just put that in there, and we'll say red border. I know that red border is what we use for our. We kind of made that red border class. And you can turn it off and on, which is our debugging border, if you will. It's 2 pixels solid red. Right? So let's see what that looks like now if I go back. So we can see what our red border looks like. Okay, cool. Do I want my header to be like this? I absolutely do. I want my header to be all the way across when I make my navigation. I don't want it to be kind of boxed into the main. I don't want that, right? But my navigation is way too much on the left. So I need a little bit of padding inside. I don't want any margin. I want my margin to be 0, right? Because I want it to hug the screen like this, right? But my padding inside has got to be at least, let's say, 10 pixels. Whoa, 10 pixels. If I use pixels and I want to make use the whole box model, the flexible box model, if I use 10 pixels and I go on a smartphone, it's going to be 10 pixels. That's going to be like 20 pixels removed from my 320 pixels. That means I only have 300 pixels left, right? So how do I do that? So let's suppose instead of 20 pixels, I say 1%. So I want to have a 1% padding on all the way around. Let's see what the effect that has. So how do I target that? I'm not targeting my main nav. I'm targeting my header, right? My main nav is another container that's inside of my header. We're going to look at that later. Okay, so my header element is going to have a. If you notice, I don't have any styles for my header. I have H1. And so on. I get to my main, and then afterwards down here probably have some kind of footer, right? But I don't have anything in my header, and I want to kind of put that in probably before my main because that's the order that I'm doing it in. So just for my header styles, I'm going to say any for my header in my page, and this particular, all my headers are going to have this style. I'm going to say I'm going to have some kind of padding, right, all the way around. That is 1%. See that with how that works. Okay, and let's go back and refresh. And now what do I get? 1%. That's 1% padding. It's pretty good, eh? It's pretty good. And that 1% is going to be reflective, right? If I squeeze my screen up, like for example, if I go here and resize my screen, right? So here I'm resizing, and notice how as my screen gets smaller in size, look at this, how my padding shrinks as well. So my padding shrinks on the left-hand side. See how small it is now? There's still a padding there, but as I expand my screen, so my padding becomes bigger, right? It gives me more space. So 1%. 1% is a pretty good amount too, by the way. And if you want to know exactly what the number is, it varies because of my screen size. So my screen size right now is like 1,200 and something pixels. In size, and if I want to look and see exactly what it is, so now I'm just going to go to my header and click onto it, and you can see the green box around it. If I scroll down all the way to the bottom, you can see that my padding is 12.5 pixels all the way around in this context because it's 1% of my screen size. So 12.5 pixels is a pretty good size. If I want less than that, let's say I want to make it 10 pixels in my desktop, what number should I put in there instead of 1%? Careful, because as we get smaller, it's kind of a weird number, right? It's kind of a thing. So how do I calculate that? So I want it to be 10 pixels, and my screen size is, I'm basing it on a basic screen size that I have right here, which is roughly 1,280 pixels in size, and I want it to be 10 pixels. How do I calculate that? So if I do the calculation, so my answer is it's got to be something divided by something is equal to 10, right? So I want to multiply it by, let's say 0.8 or something like that. So if I go 0.8 times 1,280 pixels, let's see what that is. It's roughly, 0.08, I'll be okay, times 1,280 pixels, right, is roughly 102. That's 0.8, 0.08, I mean. When we're looking at 102 pixels, is pretty big, right, for 10% or 8%. Let's go to 0.08. So 0.008, which is which we'll call 0.8 80% of 1%, right? And then I multiply that by 1280 pixels, right? So that's a 0.8%, which is equal to 10.24 roughly, right? 0.8. Might be able to go smaller. I like 0.8, and I use 0.8 sometimes when I do my coding as well, because I know that's roughly, for most screen sizes, roughly 10 pixels. So instead of 1%, let's drop this to 0.8% my padding. We can be very specific. I'm getting the actual number, like when I refresh here, I get the actual number when I look at the box model itself. When I go down, scroll down here, and I want to look at it, I can see that as I'm hitting the header, it's exactly 10.109 based on my current screen size. Okay? That's pretty good. Now, here's another one I want. I want my entire UL, my entire unordered list, okay? I want it to, first of all, I want to shift this whole thing. I want to shift everything that's in my unordered list to the right, okay? How do I do that? So remember that when I go like this, if I say I want everything in my unordered list, each of my list items, I want them to shift to the right because I want my links to appear over here, right? So how do I do that? Let's go back and try that out. So again, I'm targeting my unordered list right now. Let's go back down here. So this right now I'm targeting, if I look at main nav, I've been targeting main nav so far. So I might as well put in some styles. So main navigation styles is what I'm putting in here. So I'm kind of just annotating it for myself so I remember. And because I'm targeting the UL now, I want to target the UL, it's not going to be the list items. I kind of try and do it in a hierarchy order when I start doing stuff. So I'm going to say main nav, right, UL only the UL, right? So on the unordered list. And what I want to do is, can I use a text alignment? Can I go text align right? Is that possible? Am I allowed to do that with text? Because I'm ordering my list items, but they're not text. What does text align right mean? Right? So I want to kind of align everything to the right. There's other ways of doing it, by the way. Will this work? Let's try this out and see what happens. Right? So it kind of aligns it all to the right. So I'm not targeting my list items. That doesn't make any sense because my list items, let's make my list items, we'll make another border type to test this out, just to be very specific with our style. And just to make it a little easier, I'm going to go change my red border. This red border, I'm going to change it. Instead of solid, we'll make it dashed, right? So that it's not so stark, right? And instead of 2 pixels, we'll make it 1 pixel, right? Just to make that a little different. And we'll make another one called blue border. So here's blue border, right? Just as another little test. And we'll make it a border that's, again, 1 pixel. Do this right, 1 pixel. We'll make this one dotted, right? Blue. Okay, so we have another border that we're going to use. And what I want to do is just to show you what this is, I want to put this blue dotted border right now on my nav class, my nav bar. Right, let's see what we got. So I'm going to say red border on the outside, and then here's my blue border on the inside. So my header has a red border for testing purposes only, and my nav bar has a blue border, right? Okay, let's check this out and see what it does. And refresh. Okay, so here's an idea. So this is my header, and look at my nav. My nav itself, right, my nav bar itself, is contained inside of my my header. I want my nav to have a little bit of padding inside of itself so that my links themselves, they don't go right to the edge, right? I want to have a little bit of padding inside here. How do I do that? Right? Okay, so that means just this piece. And let's add that in. So I want to say, well, that means I'm targeting my nav, right? And I'm only targeting the element that's the nav element, right? So I want to target just the one that says main nav, not the UL, not the LI, not the anchor tag, just nav, right? With some kind of border, padding, I mean. So let me go back up to here. That's the first one that I would target, right? So I'm going to say main nav. Well, let's be careful here what this does, and I'm going to show you what it does. Is it going to add in a padding? We'll add this again, another padding of 0.8% all the way around. Well, this padding also, is it inheritable? So that means that all my elements get a padding. Or is it just my nav, no, my nav element? What does it do, right? Let's check this out. Remember, everything padding and padding, border, margin, it's all incremental. It means if I'm adding 0.8% to my style, my design size. Okay, refresh. Okay, cool. Let's take a look at what I've got here. Right, so I'm going to go back into my styles, and it's important for me to, I'm going to pull this up so we can see my, this piece. And I want to look at my header, but inside there, I want to look at my nav, and let's see what I got from my nav. So if I scroll down to my margin, I have, my margin is nothing, because I don't have a margin, right? Because I don't have more than one nav element. I have a border that's 1, that's my blue border, and my padding inside is 9.938, just my padding. That's inside of my my nav, the nav itself. Right, I'm only targeting my nav. Okay, and because my nav has no margin, right, between my and that means only this piece has padding around it. How about just to be sure? What about my UL? Does it have any padding or anything like that? And the answer is no. It doesn't have anything. So it doesn't inherit. Whatever you see here is what you get. Are we good? Are we clear of what we're doing here? Right? All I'm doing is being very specific with the space that elements take up. Okay, you know what? Now I want to do something else. These link items, right? They're too close to each other, right? I want a little bit of padding inside of the first thing I'll do, padding inside of my unordered lists, right? So right now we've only talked about my nav, which is the blue line, right? Let's talk about my unordered list. So here's my unordered list. That's this. You notice there's nothing. You can't see anything inside here at all in my unordered list, right? I want padding in my unordered list by around 0.8%, right? See where I'm going with this now. See how this thing is expanding. The outside border of this thing keeps expanding and expanding and expanding, right? So again, I'm targeting my unordered list, and I'm not only lining it to the right, but I'm also saying I want a padding, right, of 0.8%. Okay. And let's go back, and let's see what I get here. Refresh. Here's my padding inside my unordered list. So now let's turn on, just because we can't see it, let's make another border, just so we can see the differences. We'll make it a green border. And you know what, just to make it so that it's in the right order, it should probably be G, red, green, blue, right? So here's my green border. Again, just for testing, here's the header, okay? And now I want to affect my link items. They're too close together, right? Now these are my link items that I want to affect, right? My list items. So if I go back to this, right, and if I scroll down, I have my list items, my main nav list items. They're displayed inline, but I also want them to have, again, I can have margin, that'll separate them. I can also have border, right, or sorry, padding inside of them, right? Just the same as normal. I haven't added any margin yet at all. They're abutting. Each one of these things is right next to each other, right? So we'll see that later on. So let's add a padding of 0.8%. Right, all around our list items, right? And just because we don't know what they look like, we'll give them a border of black, right? And I'll just kind of describe it as a black border. So we have different red, green, blue, and we'll make a black border. So black border, and a border that's equal to 1 pixel. We'll make it solid this time, black. Here we go. Now I have this black border around my list items. So what I want to say is I want to target all my list items in here, right? So that means I got to apply the black border all around, right? For each of my list items. I could do that, right? And I'm going to do that just for our case study here, right? So here's black border. Every one. So here's my list item of black border, and I'm just going to copy and paste this So I don't have to do it over and over again. Black border, black border, black border. Okay, let's see what we get. All right, when we do our website now. Refresh. There's our black border, right? Hey, how come I got this separation between the two? I didn't call for any margin, right? I called for padding. This is my padding around my list items. So see how my links now appear, it's kind of separate. And they're all in a specific box, right? Well, there's a couple reasons why. All of our link items are the exact same size because they're link, the words are the same, right? Link dot, 01, link 2, 3, 4, 5. But if I was to change this to actually make it so that it's realistic, and after we do this, we'll take a short break. If I was to do this and make it realistic inside of our unordered list here, right? So instead of link 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Let me just take away this for a second so we can see more of it. There we go. Let's make it so that it's more realistic what they say inside of it. So instead of saying link 1, we'll call this home, right? And this one, link 2 will be products. More realistic, right? Services. We know we're going to have a services link. These five-page links. Services. About us over here. And contact us. Right, here's our contact us. Okay. Home about, about us and kind of, what does that do to our page? And you see how that affects our design, right? Notice now how the link sizes, the box that contains a link is expanding according to the size of my text that's inside, right? And here's another problem that I have, right? What if I want to make it so that the link, right? And notice here's my header, right? My header goes all the way to the edge, which is good, right? But unfortunately, my nav doesn't because I've added in some padding inside my header, right? So that doesn't make any sense to me that I would have padding in my header if I want my nav and my header to be one, right? I don't need that much padding, right? Especially if I want to give my header a background color, which is where I'm going to put it, not my nav. Let me take a look and see how that works. If I go back to header, so my header object, and again, I could make this a class 2, but I want to give it a background color. Let's make our background color black. All right, so background, this is going to complicate things for us. Background dash color, we're going to make it black. All right, our background color is black, which means that we can't see our text because our text by default is black, right? So let's make our link text. What is our link text? Where is it contained? If I go back to my navigation, is it in the UL? No, that only contains list items. Is it in the LI? No, right? That is only just the list item itself. It's the anchor tag. So that's where I hit with color. So I'm going to change this color. So my anchor tags, all my anchor tags are going to have a color of white, let's say, white colors, right? Inside my main nav. So white anchor tag, black, kind of a black box around everything. Let's take a look at that. So I'm going to go back to here and refresh. And what do I get? This. Now you see that there's still the borders, the testing borders we have in there. But that's a pretty big honking like nav bar, right? Like I think it's too thick for me, right? I mean, I've added all the separation, but isn't there a way we can make it a little bit more together, right? And for most times, what we do is we take away the padding that's inside of my header because the padding is causing a little bit of separation. So we go back to our header element. And where the header element is, we remove this padding. So we say it's going to be the same size, right? And then we test what it looks like when we take the padding away, right? That's better. But even then, the nav, even the border between the nav and my unordered list has a little bit of padding. I want to get rid of that too. Right, so go down here and go to my nav, right? So just for this piece here, this main padding here, I'm gonna leave my element in there because I might have to affect my nav in some way. But typically, for now, we don't need it. Let's just take it off. Actually, that's probably the best way to do it. So I don't need that anymore. I'll remove that. Still have my border because I didn't take it off here. And that's kind of where I want to see it, right? That's what we normally are used to. So think about this. So that means that typically when we make some kind of navigation, we want to have some kind of some other things here that we're talking about. We want to have our nav and our header collapsed. We don't want to have any margin or border around them, typically. We might want to put them in for control, to control our header and our nav, right? And from a semantic meaning perspective, we might put them in for that reason, for separation, to define our roles for our, for accessibility reasons, right? For SEO reasons, search engine optimization, so people know where this is a nav area, right? That's the good reason to put in a nav, right? But for some kind of styling, we don't necessarily need to put any styling in on those items necessarily, right? Okay, cool. So this is what we want to look like. And you know what I want? I want so that when I have a class of active, right? When I have a class of active assigned to something, I want my class of active to highlight this area. Instead of it being black, I want to override the background color, right? To make it like a dark gray, right? That's what I wanted. So how do I do that? So let's go back. So remember that our default color is coming from our header. The header has our background color of black. And I want to add a dark gray, right? And it's not going to be just on our anchor tag, because our anchor tag is like this small, right? Let me show you this. So if I go on my background color, just on my anchor tag, we're going to take it off, by the way. This is wrong, right? If I go background color of dark gray, right? There it is, dark gray. What do I get if it's just my anchor tag? So if I go back, refresh, I get this. That don't look good. That's like a 1980s website, right? So that's not what I want. Okay, and dark gray is not really that dark gray. I kind of even like it darker than that. That's almost like a light gray for me. Let's go back, right? So I'm going to go to this and this dark gray. You know what? I want to make it a darker gray than this, right? So I want to figure out what that color is in a second. But let's move it to the next level. So I'm going to cut it out of here because that's wrong, and I'm going to put it on the list item and see if that's right. All right. So here's my dark gray. Okay, and let's see what that looks like. Refresh. That's a little better, but wow, man, what's this padding that I got over here? It's not padding, it's the border. I got test borders that are going on that you can't see now because it's so dark, right? So let's get rid of some of these borders. That's what I do want, but I don't want any borders around anything anymore, because that's what I'm getting. This extra information here, this padding on the right and left and all that, it's all border. That's what it is, man. It's crazy, right? Let's get rid of all those borders. Those test borders, we don't need them anymore, right? We've been outlining our stuff. So we want to get rid of our UL green border. We're going to get rid of that. And we're going to get rid of my blue border, right? So that's inside my, my nav. And we're going to get rid of the red border that's around my header, right? And the black border that's also around my, my list item. We're going to get rid of all these things, right? And we'll do the same thing now that we've got that. We'll just kind of copy and paste because I don't want to just do all that. It's just easier for me just to want to do these, right? Far easier. Okay, and now that I've got these are all my borders off, and now let's check and see what it looks like when I go back. Okay, it's still got separation. How come? How come? How come? Like, what's causing that separation, man? I don't have any borders anymore. You know, let's take a look at these items. So let's target my list item and see what I got, right? So I can look down and see what is I have. I have a padding of 0.8%. Where did I get that padding? That's one thing I need. I do need the padding, right? I got a border of 0 and a margin of 0, but somehow I still have this separation, right, of list items when I look at the list item itself, right? How about my UL? My UL has padding, right? That's cool. I like the padding around my unordered list, right? And notice how my there's the size of my unordered list. Take a look at it. Goes right across, and my objects peek outside of it. They kind of poke outside of my unordered list. Why is that? Because they're bigger. They're much bigger than the unordered list. I haven't defined a size for my unordered list, and so my unordered list doesn't wrap everything. Likewise for my anchor tag. If I go to my anchor tag here, right, and I click onto it, and I scroll down, I have no margin in padding, but my anchor tag has auto. I want to get rid of this margin that's going on here. Where's this margin coming from? This little margin on the right, padding and whatever. So how do I take those away? If I go back to my list items, because that's where inside each of these list items, I want and no separation, right? So let's go back and get rid of that. So I'm going to go back to this. And just to make sure that everything is zeroed out, right, in my list items, in my main nav, so this padding is inside the list item, right, but I want margins of 0. So I want no margin between anything, right? So I want to say margin 0. Right? I don't want margins between my list items at all. Just to make sure, right? So go back here to make sure that's not the issue. And you see there's no change, right? Because there's still this little separation of concerns. And I don't have any other border or anything else. You guys get this as well, right? The same thing. And I don't want to apply this gray border anyway to every single element. I only want to apply to the active element right now, which is going to be home. So let me take that border away to this background color, dark gray, right, as an example. I'm going to take this whole thing away here and make it a class called active. Right, and again, this is in my navigation styles. So I'm going to have the active nav, right? So we're going to just call it a class of active, where we're going to put in this style, right, dark gray, and we're going to put it inside of our list item, right, with a class of active. So class is equal to active, right? So that's the home is our active link right now because we're inside the home element, right? And if I go back and refresh, now. That didn't work. Let's try that again. And refresh. Now you see that the home is the one that's active, right? The rest of them are links. But hey, I'm not getting any feedback from my links. How do I get feedback? Because I turned all that off with my reset, right? We'll get back to that after the break. Okay, so let's take a short break, and we'll get back to that. Make these things look like links when I hover over them. All right?